Good afternoon. I'm Chair of the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology. On behalf of myself and my friend Purnima Bose, Chair of the Department of English, I welcome you to the special event honoring the career and achievements of Dr. Dorothy Noyes. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the emeritus faculty and the alumni who have returned to campus today. Welcome back. Today's award, the Distinguished Alumni Scholar Award, highlights the connections between the departments of English and Folklore and the inaugural event of our Folk 100, commemorating 100 years of the study of folklore at Indiana University. Stiff Thompson, the distinguished professor, sorry. Things out of order. Okay. This year is the 100th year of graduate training in folklore studies here at IU. In 1926, 6 graduate students completed their MA thesis under the supervision of IU Distinguished Professor of English and Folklore, Stiff Thompson. Their topics included Indiana ballads, African folktales, French-Canadian tales, and Native American myths. Thompson's The Types of the Folktale, first published in 1928, and his monumentous Motif Index of Folk Literature, first published in 6 volumes in the 1930s, and revised by Thompson in the 1950s, are still used all over the world today. These 2 important volumes also celebrate the connection between English and folklore. Stiff Thompson was Distinguished Professor Richard Dorson, helped found the Department of Folklore in 1965. In 2000, we became the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology. This intellectual intermingling of English, folklore, and ethnomusicology takes place in our fabulous and beloved College of Arts and Sciences. On behalf of the faculty and the students present here today, I thank the Dean of the College, Rick Van Kooten, for his enthusiastic support of the humanities in the college. And I invite Rick Van Kooten to the podium now. Thank you.
Thanks, Pravina. And I want to first thank Purnima Bose, Chair of the Department of English, and Pravina Shukla, the Provost Professor and Chair of Folklore and Ethnomusicology, and Vanessa Clough at the back, all who are responsible for organizing this celebratory event. So big round of applause for them as well. The other connection between English and folklore is the fact, and I think Pravina's talked about this before, I do consider both of them jewels of the crown of the College of Arts and Sciences. That they are sort of like the places that stand out in the humanities. The folklore and ethnomusicology, we know, is top-ranked program in the U.S. Very, very proud of them. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dorothy Noyes, also known as Dory, who will receive a Distinguished Alumni Scholar Award and then deliver a talk called The Human Scale, Admonitions from Opera and Folktale. Professor Noyes is someone whose career trajectory really is quite remarkable. And let's take a moment to consider it. She received her BA in English here in 1983, graduating with something relatively rare even then, rigorous training in the Catalan language. Actually, I made sure, because I went to the schedule of courses and checked out how many courses in Catalan are being offered this semester, and it was 6. I had 3 undergrad and 3 grad. You know, they're reading courses, but still, Catalan. She went on to earn her PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, and then embarked on an award-winning career as a folklorist, studying the politics of post-Franco Spain and Catalonia. We often refer to scholarship as groundbreaking, and in this case, Dory's path is particularly intriguing. Just think for a moment about this fact that Dorothy Noyes, a folklorist trained first in English at a university, is currently the director of Mershon Center for International Security Studies. So it sounds like an odd mix, but given that it's a leading global security and international relations think tank, it's populated by political theorists, retired military officers, and international relations scholars, and has been run since 2022 by someone trained in both English and folklore in narrative and performance, where Dory developed the center's cross-disciplinary mission to capture the human factor in security issues, which is greatly, greatly needed and greatly appreciated. So consider also these additional achievements on top of that. Dorothy Noyes holds the equivalent of Indiana University's distinguished professor rank at the Ohio State University. I should talk to you about I got to talk to you about the linguistics of that. Where she directed Ohio State's Center for Folklore Studies and created this graduate interdisciplinary specialization in folklore for which she designed the core curriculum. She served as president of the American Folklore Society, and many of you know that the headquarters are here, right here on our campus. Actually, in the room are 4 presidents of the American Folklore Society. So can you please stand up for a big round of applause? We gotta be proud of that. And she received her honorary doctorate from the University of Tartu, the National University of Estonia. Her scholarship has been published in English, Spanish, Italian, German, and Catalan, often without a translator herself, and is also being translated into Turkish, Chinese, and Japanese. Her book titles give you just a glimpse of the range of her interests and expertise. Fire in the Plaza, Catalan Festival Politics After Franco, Humble Theory, Folklore's Grasp on Social Life, published by Indiana University Press, and the co-authored Sustaining Interdisciplinary Collaboration, A Guide for the Academy, which actually I will look that up and probably order to read, because we need to be doing much more of this. And our current book project is Exemplary Failures, Gestures and Pedagogy in Liberal Politics. Dorothy's scholarship, linguistic ability, and professional experience has relevance across a wide swath of the core college, as well as the Hampton Douglas School of Global International Studies, and her work connects folklore to an enormous number of conversations across both disciplinary boundaries and international borders. She's quite simply a folklorist other folklorists point to as one of the best in her field. Someone who actively builds bridges across these disciplines, borders, and policy worlds. Actually, I had a half an hour just meeting with her today, and actually I was late for the next meeting. There's a whole group of people actually waiting for me downstairs. But I lost track of time because of a wonderful conversation. She was talking about folklore, that the folk in there are no longer 100% human. And now we have this hybrid of digital pieces being mixed in from social media, and then I was talking about like machine lore, and we're talking about what other things that machines will invent. And I'm a nerd, I'm a physics professor, and I just love that. I read a lot of science fiction, so fascinating stuff that you're doing. So Dory, we welcome you home to your undergrad alma mater. And I'm deeply honored to recognize you today with a Distinguished Alumni Scholar Award. Or we just go with it.
What are you going to do with it? Use the microphone.
Well, thanks. Can you, yes, very good. Thanks to Dean Van Kooten, and thanks to Professor Shukla for these kind words. Thanks to Professor Premi Mavose in the Department of English, to the colleagues in folklore and ethnomusicology for their work in making this nomination. Great thanks to Vanessa Clough and her team in the Office of Alumni Engagement for a lot of labor in putting this event together. Thanks to Mike for getting me here in every sense of that phrase. And thanks to the old friends and those of you I haven't yet met for coming today. It is nice to be back at the mothership, if I may say, of my field. I am a bit embarrassed to be receiving this award because my undergraduate career was in fact not so distinguished by any metric, and starting with that of GPA, I did not do you honor. Discipline has never been my strong suit, and yet what I learned here was transformative. Everything that I got from the College of Arts and Sciences at Indiana has allowed me to adapt in the exercise of my profession, which is something we all need to do these days. It has consoled me along the bumps in my own path and the perturbations of the world. It has helped me to understand the ways I'm embedded in the world. It's made me, I think, at every scale, a better citizen and neighbor than I would have been. And above all, though not overnight, it has made me a better listener. I listen daily as an undergraduate to other students whose backgrounds were different from mine. I come from suburban Chicago, so that means kids from rural areas, kids from small towns in the Midwest, as well as from other countries. I listened intently to professors who thought their topic was the most interesting thing in the world, and I learned from Philip Rossico that it is possible to be passionately interested in medieval Catalan linguistics. And I learned how old parchments and inscriptions would allow that interest to be pursued. More readily, I was drawn in by the sympathetic absorption of my professors in the worlds they studied. Ernest Bernhard Kabisch on the Romantic poets, Talbot Donaldson on Chaucer, Judith Anderson on the metaphysical poets, Susan Gubar on the Victorians, Luis Beltran on early Spanish lyric, Eva Kagan-Kantz on the Russian novel, Stephen Murray on the construction of the Gothic cathedrals and why some of them fell down. In those freer days, I wandered around the curriculum at my own sweet will. And I also wandered around the campus to the Musical Arts Center, the film series at Bears Place and Wittenberger Auditorium, and the upper floors of the library late at night. That wandering shaped a disposition that I now rely on as a scholar. So I do close reading. I look carefully at the particulars and how they are fitted together. I compare across cases, I find patterns, I make guesses as to their implications, and I go down rabbit holes. When something catches my imagination, I go after it, however winding the path, however obscure the destination. And this is what giant universities are so good at. This is why I, found a home at Ohio State, having learned this at Indiana. When you have courses in everything and a library with everything, size really does matter. You can find it all. You can go anywhere. Now, it was not until my senior year that the really important things happened. I found stable points of orientation. In both cases, it was absolutely by accident. I took a course in Catalan, and then I took all the courses in Catalan, truthfully out of vanity. I wanted to know something that none of my friends had ever heard of, but I was caught. I was caught, and I found folklore studies shamefully only in my last semester here, because I met some of the program's grad students in a seminar on medieval Celtic literature. Now, in later years, of course, many people in this room would shape my thinking decisively. But here's where I ended up from those two encounters. So as a folklorist, I think about vernacular and marginalized perspectives on the world. I think about the residual elements of contemporary life, and some of these are celebrated as tradition, and others are habits that really go unnoticed. I think about social life as something that is enacted through shared forms. Folklore really started as a humanistic discipline, and that means we care about the forms for their own sake, as well as the human and the extra-human networks that they sustain. I was able to do fieldwork in Catalonia because I learned the language here. And I discovered in the library at Penn a book about a festival in an industrial town in the Pyrenees. I went to see what it was like on the ground, and I was able to engage on their terms. My career path did not allow me to remain a specialist in Catalonia, and today the scholars I hang out with are mostly in international relations. But the combination of folklore studies and hanging out with people who had grown up under Franco's dictatorship have kept me focused on a few set of issues. First of all, the popular arts as an arena of public reason, one that is more inclusive than Habermas's coffee house. Social debate as conducted through formal variation. We share stories, all of us tell them in different ways, we pull them back and forth, retell and repurpose them. Typification rather than abstraction. I don't look for general laws, but I look at how people pick out anecdotes to talk about what the world is like. Indirection, ambiguity, deniability. I look at how people communicate when they know they're not going to win the argument, and they know that they're going to have to keep living together anyway. I'm going to give you two examples of the kind of thing that interests me from domains in which IU Bloomington has storied expertise, opera and folktale. I'm going to talk about Mozart's La Clemenza di Tito, an opera which was premiered in great splendor at a Habsburg coronation, and the sun's myth, quietly recounted 1 century later by an Indian elder to a European anthropologist in a small town in western Washington. One story shows a new world beginning, the other shows how a world ends. Each narrative constitutes an indirect warning to a powerful actor, and each uses stylistic devices to assert the importance of social connection and everyday resources, life at the human scale. When we think about Mozart and politics, most of us think about Enlightenment and specifically the revolutionary implications of the Marriage of Figaro, or about the Masonic philosophy of the magic flute, with its view of masculine reason overcoming feminine irresponsibility. But Mozart's penultimate opera, La Clemenza di Tito, The Clemency of Titus, used to be overlooked as a kind of throwback to old-fashioned operatic conventions and old-fashioned aristocratic politics. But there's actually a good case to view it as Mozart's most modern opera, one that captures a critical moment of transition. It uses 3 different musical styles to play out the tension between 2 reactions to the old court politics of aristocratic rivalry. One of them is bourgeois sympathy, which points towards democratization, and the other is the central administrative state, which pushes towards authoritarianism and mass politics. So in the opera, feeling and two-way communication are played against abstraction and a leap of scale. You can think about Clemency of Titus as kind of the Marriage of Figaro at the level of the state instead of at the household. So Clemenza was composed for the 1791 coronation in Prague of the Habsburg Prince Leopold II as King of Bohemia. And he had just acceded to the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, and this was one of several new titles that he had gotten. The opera had to be written in a hurry, and the libretto reworked a 40-year-old text by the consummate court poet Pietro Metastasio. So like dozens of other plays and operas from the late Absolutist period, Clemenza legitimates absolute monarchy, both as something that's divinely ordained and something that is humanly justified by the ruler's possession of compassion, which is exercised in his power of clemency. This was a pretty tired story at the moment when Mozart took it up. So why did the estates of Bohemia, which means primarily the Bohemian nobility, commission Mozart to bring this story back? Leopold had been Grand Duke of Tuscany, where he was one of the most enlightened rulers in Europe. He abolished the death penalty before anybody else in Europe did. He was influenced by the jurist Cesare Beccaria, who inspired our own founding fathers in criminal justice, and Beccaria was also well known for really denouncing clemency, the power of princely pardon. He said it was theatrical, it was arbitrary, the rule of law was a much better thing. But when Leopold inherited the empire, he was facing noble revolt. In 1791, he had just exercised the tradition of Austrian clemency in the Netherlands after a big rebellion. He pardoned the conspirators, he also occupied the territory. The Bohemian nobles who had commissioned Mozart's opera were not happy with the reforms of Leopold's brother, Joseph II, and Leopold had just appeased them by restoring serfdom. Furthermore, Leopold was the brother of Marie Antoinette, but of course he was the ruler of a rival power, so he stood in a quite uncomfortable relation to the events of 1789. So, you don't have to read all of that, but the librettist Caterina Mazzola worked with Mozart to reduce this sort of long old libretto to what Mozart called a true opera. La Clemenza is the turning point of a dramatic tradition that takes shape in the 17th century with the flowering of absolutism and runs strong through the 18th century. Frederick the Great of Prussia, who was fond of music, himself composes the libretto to a clemency opera. After Mozart, it's reworked in other texts, including Schiller's Don Carlos, Hugo's Hernani, and then it sort of plays itself out in Verdi's Aida, even in some ways Puccini's Turandot. This scenario is always displaced to conceal its immediate political relevance. So it's set in ancient Rome, it's set in Spain, it's set in Egypt, anywhere that is not contemporary Western Europe. And it involves court conflict. Old aristocrats are fighting over their passions and their prerogatives, and there are sort of liberal stirrings in the middle of this. The sovereign is betrayed by a friend, and then the sovereign has to decide what to do. Am I going to execute them or pardon them? So then the pardon clemency happens, or sometimes it doesn't. At the same time, the sovereign fails to marry, or has a marriage that is not successful. There's a sort of double problem with a friend and with a marriage. And the sovereign is elevated to sublimity. The sovereign is, his divinity is revealed. He's placed at this sort of remove above his subjects. And then the dramas play out the results. What happens to the society? What happens to the state? What happens to the sovereign himself? So Mozart gives us a happy ending, but only just. As in his other major operas, Clemenza dramatizes, and again you can think of Figaro if you know that, Clemenza dramatizes the interplay between sovereign clemency, I have the right to pardon you, and interpersonal forgiveness. The plot does its best to emulsify the two, but they are really like oil and water. Musically, narratively, they can't come together. And it's worth knowing that the opera was not a big success at the coronation premiere. The new empress dismissed it as German filth. But its reputation took off very soon afterwards. So what do we have? The opera opens with an argument among aristocratic intimates. Vitellia, the woman with the skirts, is the daughter of a prior emperor. She wants to be empress. She thinks Tito should marry her, but he's in love with the Judean princess Berenice. So Vitellia orders her lover Sesto, who happens to be Tito's best friend, to kill the emperor and to set fire to the Campidoglio, the seat of government in Rome. There are a lot of high notes. There are a lot of very difficult coloratura passages. There are a lot of difficult jumps across the soprano register. After we hear Vitellia's rage, we hear Sesto's despairing entreaty. He doesn't want to kill his best friend. He thinks this is a bad idea. Sesto was originally sung by a castrato, and this is the artificial high voice with which Baroque opera expressed male heroism. So he sings, there are high notes, there are difficult coloratura passages. Sesto asks Vitellia to think better of her plan, and she ignores him. He says, well, look at me at least. She ignores him. The scene ends with them singing in parallel of their separate frustrations. 1,000 emotions war pitilessly within me. No heart has ever been more deeply wounded than mine. This is stylistically old school. Mozart is developing the Baroque opera seria tradition of a parade of bravura arias, each focused on a particular emotion. It's also politically old school. This is the honor ethic, and this is zero-sum thinking. The primary political action is revenge, and the larger world is just a stage for that, just a stage for emotion to wreak itself out. So Vitellia doesn't just say, kill Tito, she says, burn down the government, have a conspiracy. So we see here an old politics of noble contention and negative reciprocity that is precisely what 17th century absolutism was trying to get under control by centralizing power. And as a matter of fact, Vitellia has misjudged Tito. He has accepted that for the stability of the empire, he must take a Roman bride, and he has sent the woman he loves back to Judea. He consoles himself with the idea that he can at least cement the bonds of friendship, and so he decides to marry Servilia, the sister of Sesto. Little does he know that Servilia is in love with his other friend, Annio, and Annio is too much in awe of Tito's rank to tell him so. So Annio has to go tell Servilia of the honor that's about to befall her. And he holds back his feelings. He addresses her as Augusta, Empress, and he tries to leave as soon as he's given her the news, but she protests. And this is the first turning point of the opera. She demands that he stay with her so that they can think together. You can't leave me confused like this. Explain it to me. And then they sing a duet. Mozart introduced this duet into the older libretto. It builds on a musical invention of his comic operas, what the musicologist François de Médicis calls the duet of influence, in which two characters who are at odds come to understand with each other. So I'm going to show this to you, and you want to watch how it starts. There's a first statement from Annio, which Servilia repeats musically, but she revises it affectively. And then they're going to move into dialogue, and then they're going to finish in close harmony, with the higher voice taking the lead, and the lower voice in a kind of active affirmation. And now we will see, see if we can get it. All right. So what we have there is the intensification of sympathy, which is a key political concept of the late 18th century, even though here it's sort of a sex scene. Servilia is reasoning with Annio. She says you can't just throw away an early affection, it's a real thing. But this mutual orientation of talk, their physical proximity are literally attuning them to one another. They sing, this line, più che ascolto I sensi tuoi, in me cresce più l'ardor. And the translation is difficult. The more I listen to your sensi, means senses, it means your intentions, it means your meanings. It's a very embodied word for talking about listening to what you're saying. But the more I listen to you, the more my ardor grows, and of course they are coming closer and closer together. So the theory of sympathy in 18th century drama, as expounded by Lessing and Diderot and many others, is that the sharing of human emotions within the space of the theater, all of us in a relatively small theater who are sitting around this experience, looking at it together and seeing each other weep or seeing each other moved, that this is going to build up the polity from these interpersonal foundations of companionate marriage, marriage for love, and friendship. It's a very bourgeois conception of founding the public good on private virtues at the human scale. Now, of course, Anio and Servilia in this plot are aristocrats, but they are younger and less important than Sesto and Vitellia. Servilia's name even kind of suggests a lower rank, but they also rank low structurally according to the rules of opera seria. Anio is the second castrato, Servilia is the seconda donna. They have less stage time, their music is less virtuosic, and that's quite important because you and I could sing this. Maybe not well, but we could sing it because it falls within the normal human vocal range. It does not demand extraordinary skill or athleticism, and as a matter of fact, this duet circulates in piano reduction, print copies across Europe, to be sung at the piano in domestic music making. It was the most popular number of what was, until about 1830, Mozart's most popular opera. So in terms of 18th century musical aesthetics, this duet is not sublime, it's not amazing and superhuman like the stuff Vitellia sings. It's beautiful, it is tender, lovely, intimate. So after that strengthening of sympathy, Servilia is emboldened, and we get to see that sympathy is going to lead to good private outcomes and good public outcomes. She goes and she speaks to the emperor, and she tells him the truth. You know, I will be empress if you ask me to, but I have to tell you I'm in love with Anio. And Tito listens to her, and he changes his plan. And he sings, if only every heart in the empire were as sincere, rule would not be torment, it would be happiness. So, maybe we have a happy ending? Now, of course, the plot gets complicated because Vitellia never listens, and we have another act to get through. So there are further misunderstandings, and Sesto does indeed have to start a rebellion and set fire to the Campidoglio, but Tito escapes with his life. Sesto confesses and is condemned to death, and now Servilia makes another move. She finds Vitellia, who is flailing in guilt over Sesto's fate, and Servilia interrupts her with a short aria, which says, if you have nothing but tears for him, your weeping doesn't help. This useless pity is just another kind of cruelty. With this rather bourgeois practicality, she dismisses the whole tradition of opera seria, and wonderful wonder of wonders, after a final, rather long, self-pitying aria, Vitellia rushes off to the Capitoline Hill. She confesses her guilt. She pleads to Tito for Sesto's pardon. Tito gives it. We'll get back to that in a second. Vitellia resigns herself to companionate marriage with Sesto. Anio embraces Servilia, and they will all live happily ever after in the glow of enlightened absolutism, energized from below by the freedom of subjects to approach their ruler and speak the truth. So we have a really good political story to tell, especially if you do not want the French Revolution to make its way to Vienna. Tito, however, who after all is the titular hero of the opera, how does he fit into all of this? So the clemency tradition solves this problem through literal sublimation. In the course of the drama, the prince contends with his human desires for love and vengeance, and he overcomes them by jumping up scale. He crosses the limit to become the divine king. In this tableau from Act 1, we see in the back, it's a little vague, but there's a ship back there. And that's the ship that's taking the woman he loves back to Judea. Tito is left alone in the middle of a chorus, which is what the rest of his life is going to look like. Tito's bride is now Rome, says the original libretto. So Tito gets on with it. Annio comes up and says the Senate has voted to build him a temple. Tito says, no, give the money to the victims of the Vesuvius eruption. He's thinking like a utilitarian ruler, a step ahead of the divine ruler of the 17th century. His next move is going to be that political marriage, and at this point he's thinking he can still be a progressive ruler, and if he can't have love, he can at least have friendship. So he says that if he marries Servilia, he can reduce, quote, the infinite distance that the gods placed between Sesto and Tito. When Sesto betrays him and destroys that second hope of friendship, Tito regresses into old-school aristocratic rage. His struggle between divine clemency and the human desire for revenge occupies a lot of the second act, but eventually he does the godlike thing. And his final decision is affirmed when Vitellia confesses that it was she, not Sesto, who started the revolt. And at this point, when he learns, so he was going to now marry Vitellia, and now he learns that she's betrayed him also, so Tito just sort of gives up on humanity and rises into pure abstractions. And he starts singing craziness. The stars that conspire to make me cruel in spite of myself will not triumph. We will see which is stronger, the perfidy of others or my clemency. They're no longer human actors, these are concepts. So he pardons Sesto and all of his followers, and he sings, "Let it be known in Rome that I am the same, and that I know all, absolve all, and forgive all." This is the opposite of the duet of influence. The former conspirators don't dare even to look at him. They're abashed, they sing of this sublime goodness, not the man Tito, that is drawing tears to their eyes. In an opera that places constant emphasis on interpersonal learning, on attention and consideration and memory, is it really a good outcome to have the ruler say, I forget everything? In the meantime, the orchestra plays a march, the chorus sings praises, and Tito vows his heart to Rome. But there's a backstage to sublimation, and it's been emphasized in recent productions of the opera. Tito complains from the beginning of the torment of the, quote, sublime throne. It's relieved only by his power of exercising compassion. So his famous clemency is a kind of compulsive thing, trying to resolve impero, empire or rule, and cuore, heart. In the last act, he says to Sesto, tell me, you're my friend, tell me why you did this. And Sesto is quiet, he doesn't want to protect Vitellia. So Tito just says, rulers cannot connect to the feelings of those around them, so what am I going to do? And he sings, if a severe heart is necessary to rule, then take the empire from me, or give me a different heart. And he vacillates between revenge, the rule of law, and his future fame, and for the latter he decides to stay the course, with the clemency that singles out a ruler from ordinary mortals. With this, he will get the love of his subjects, the love of posterity. And this is a version of what Giorgio Agamben called the sovereign exception. But it lays big psychological costs on a sovereign who was, of course, born a man. Now, Tito's normal musical language is very classical. It's concise, it's stiff, it's often in the public rhythm of the march, and it's supported at a distance by a chorus. He's a tenor. His music is pitched above the normal, comfortable, natural male voice in this upper middle range, and this is the most precarious and the most audibly effortful of all operatic voices. And in this opera, he sort of abandons this strenuous declamation, and he gives way to this Baroque craziness, to these fioriture, like those of Vitellia. It's an indication of the struggle he has to contain his feelings. It's really a mad scene. So he addresses that last aria to the Amici Dei, the gods, the friend gods, the deities and the deified emperors, who are now the only friends he has left. The rest of his life will be in public. The ambiguities of Clemenza foreshadow the 19th century compromises of the forces of reaction with bourgeois politics. Again, we're trying to stave off the French Revolution here. Later revisions of the narrative foretell outcomes that we have seen played out in history. Schiller and Verdi's Don Carlos portrays Philip II as a ruler who relies on the enlarged forces of the administrative state to project his rage upon an empire. And Philip, therefore, falls under the sway of an authoritarian project that he's unable to control. Hugo Zernani does a different thing. It depicts Charles V as a successful sublimator who gets over his, annoyance and becomes happy to delegate his territories to corrupt local governance, and he goes off to his next project of world domination. None of Tito's successors are good listeners. We are moving towards a world of abstract forces and alienated leadership. So Mozart warns of perilous contradictions within the modern order that is taking shape, the tension between bourgeois virtue among private individuals and raison d'etat at the scale of the state. The sovereign may or may not have ears to hear. Leopold II actually died 2 years after succeeding to the throne, and interestingly, that's also what happened to the historical Tito. But the performance context of a state ceremony and a public theater, soon followed by commercial performances and sheet music, made Mozart's replay of the clemency scenario available to a variety of actors with a stake in the world that was taking shape. The drama's multiple voices allowed them to see themselves in its playing out. It created the opportunity for collective and cumulative reflection. All right, now I'm turning to something easier. I turn now to a very different context of performance and a very different world, one that's not beginning but ending and giving way to another. We are 100 years later, in 1891, and we're in the Columbia River Valley on the northwest coast of what has become the United States. A middle-aged Indian, who has become an elder by virtue of much death around him, is speaking to a young anthropologist from an East Coast university. This encounter of worlds took place at human scale. Franz Boas, a founder of American folklore studies, better known for his role in the founding of American anthropology, had come to the Northwest Coast to document the cultures and cultural relations of the native groups of the region. These were prosperous tribes. They lived from the abundant salmon run of the Columbia River, as well as the resources of the forest. They were traders, both among themselves and with the French, British, and American ships that came looking for furs. They had stratified societies. They practiced slavery. By the time Boas arrived in 1890, however, their populations had been ravaged by disease and displaced by treaties and Anglo settlers. Boas and Kulti could meet one another halfway. Kulti was typically multi-tribal and multilingual, as was the German Jewish exile, Franz Boas. You see Boas here demonstrating a hamatzah ceremony to museum curators. And Boas soon discovered what he called Kulti's remarkable intelligence. They communicated in Chinook jargon, a long-standing regional trade language, and as was typical of the period, Kulti was paid for his work with Boas, but Boas returned to Kulti more than to any other consultant, and Kulti furnished the narratives that Boas published as Chinook texts in 1894 and Kathlemet texts in 1901. Boas notes that Kulti would explain difficult sentences to him and would teach him grammar by offering multiple examples of a construction. So we can see there's not just intelligence here, there's motivation. Kulti is not just spouting out words for money. He wants Boas to understand. So he was among the last 3 known speakers of the Kathlemet language, and according to Boas, he was the only one who could still tell complete stories, coherent stories, traditional narratives. And these stories, furthermore, were not only from the past. There were also narratives of recent history, and the following story, the Sun's Myth, is in traditional style with familiar scenes and characters, but no other version of it has been found. And so Del Himes, who returned to Boas's text to retranslate it and elucidate it, suggests that this story is a genuine case of mythopoesis. It's a new myth. So here it is, and folklorists, I apologize, you have heard this story a lot, but nonetheless, the sun's myth. They lived there, those people of a town, 5, the towns of his relatives, that chief. In the early light, now he used to go out and outside, now he used to stay, now he used to see that sun. She would nearly come out, that sun. Now he told his wife, what would you think if I went to look for that sun? She told him, his wife, you think it is near, and you will wish to go to that sun? Next day, he goes out, he looks at the sun again. He told his wife, you shall make me 10 pairs of moccasins, you shall make me leggings for 10 people. Now she made them for him, his wife, moccasins for 10 people, the leggings for as many. Again it became light. Now he went, far he went. So what's happening? We have a chief from a well-positioned family. He's surrounded by his relatives. He develops a strange fascination with this shiny thing that is hidden. Remember, Oregon is a cloudy place, and he wants to go to it. Despite his wife's sarcasm, he sets out to find it. We have 2 warning signs that this is not going to end well. There's a contrast between near and far. There's also something happening with numbers. 5 is a number that expresses, like 3 in Western culture, it expresses completeness or plenitude in these cultures. 5 villages with related chiefs is a stable world. But he wants 10 of everything for his journey, enough for 10 people, and he is one man. He walks for 10 months. He uses up month by month all of that clothing. He comes to a house with a girl who's identified as prepubescent. The house is really amazing. The Columbia River people were travelers across their thickly peopled region, but he goes alone for a long, long way, and he finally comes to this house and he enters it. There's a girl there, but his attention is grabbed by all the stuff. He looks at one wall, it's covered with men's goods, and this is repeated line after line after line. Arrows are hanging on it, quivers of arrows are hanging on it, on and on, so that as a listener you can't take in all these details, it's just a lot of wealth. And then the same thing goes on the other side with all of the women's goods. So he says to the girl, whose things are these? And she says, and again he asks item by item, and she tells him, item by item, my and my grandmother's things. She saves them for my maturity. These are goods that will serve as gifts for the guests at her marriage feast. They're part of the chiefly social contract of sharing wealth across the community. And then the man sees a shiny thing hanging by the door. He thinks, I will take her. Again, we have a warning sign. He's amazed by the wealth of the house and the shiny thing, and he makes a rash and improper decision to marry a girl who is identified as underage. He's not doing this for his community, which is far away. He's doing it for himself. So he's there. He stays with them, and the old woman, the grandmother, goes out every morning, and every night she comes home with a shining thing, and she hangs it by the door. She brings other stuff home too, more blankets, more armor. He likes the shining thing. He sticks around a long time, but he gets homesick. He starts getting up in the morning. The girl and the grandmother notice that he's depressed. They confer. They decide to send him home with gifts. So the grandmother offers him anything in the house, again, item by item, over and over, and he only wants the shining thing. She keeps trying to offer him the kind of goods that somebody like him should have. It goes on and on. When she would reach that thing put up away, now her heart became tired. Now she told him, you must carry it then. Take care if you carry it. It is you who choose. I try to love you. Indeed, I do love you. She hung it on him. She hung it all on him. Now she gave him a stone axe. She told him, go home now. So he starts for home, carrying the shiny thing like a blanket on his back. He reaches his uncle's town. Now that thing which he held shook. Now that which he held said, we too shall strike your town. We too shall strike your town. That thing which he held said. His reason became nothing. He did it to his uncle's town. He crushed it. He killed all the people. He recovered. All those houses are crushed. His hands are full of blood. He thought, Oh, I am a fool. See, it is just like that, this thing. Why was I made to love it? He tried in vain to wrench it off, and his flesh would be pulled. This happens over and over in agonizing repetition. At each one of his relatives' villages, he loses his mind, he kills everybody, he comes to himself, the ground is full of corpses, his hands are only blood. Over and over he tries to scrape the shining thing away, but it sticks to him and drives him forward. The repetition is like the earlier catalogue of wealth, it overwhelms the listener. Eventually he comes to his own town, and there's another iteration of the slaughter. He looked back. Now she was standing there, that old woman. You, she told him, you. I try in vain to love you. I try in vain to love your relatives. Why do you weep? It is you who choose. Now you carry that blanket of mine. Now she took it. She took off what he held. Now she left him. She went home. He stayed there. He went a little distance. There he built a house, a small house. After this, one should just stop talking, but I'm an academic, so bear with me a few minutes longer. What was Charles Kalti doing, creating this story? Del Himes, the folklorist who revisited Boaz's transcription, used to say that the story made him think of the ruins of Hiroshima, which he had seen on leave from his time in the Korean War. Himes summed up the tale as a chief destroying his own people out of hubris. He remarked the absence of European or foreign elements in the story, and he and later interpreters such as Barry Tolkien have noted the chief's violation of social norms, especially the relationship of reciprocity with nature as the endogenous causes of the disaster. They note the role of women in asserting those norms, good sense, and attempting to prevent the violations. But as we have seen, the chief did not listen. Here, as in other Indian tales translated by Himes, we end with a lament, "In vain I tried to tell you." Later interpreters, including Tolkien and Michael Elliott, have interrogated the performance situation, suspecting that Kalti might be using the story to admonish Boaz himself, the foreigner who came to carry their stories away. But I suspect there's still more to it than that. The Kaplamet were at the middle level of tribes in the Northwest. They were relatively wealthy and secure because of the salmon runs, but they had to husband their resources carefully to get through the rest of the year. They shared and traded goods, but they did not indulge in the conspicuous waste of the Kwakiutl potlatch. Now, for a century, since 1792, they had been in contact with Europeans who expended remarkable resources to leave their own societies and make their way by ship or wagon train hardly thinkable distances to reach the Northwest coast, where they found wealth, settled down without being invited, and in some cases also took wives. Kalti, in his time, was able to observe the jockeying over borders and natural resources among the settlers that was not only displacing the preceding peoples, but creating dissension among the Euro-Americans themselves. The Europeans were clearly operating without a sense of proportion. Developing an unlikely intimacy with Franz Boas, who he knew would preserve and disseminate the native wisdom that was fast dying out in its human representatives, Kalti may have seen a chance to counsel the newcomers. Distance and quantity, so important to the rhetoric of this narrative, were also a language Euro-Americans could understand. Wealth, ambition, and free choice were psychological bridges. Sitting amid the ruins of his cultural past, Kalti made use of Boaz to send a warning to the rulers of the future. Two stories, then, each told at the cusp of transition in the world order. Each story dramatizes the benefits of listening and the dangers of not doing so. Each shows more precisely how a concentration of power draws the leader away from ordinary interaction and vaults him up to a superhuman scale with which he is psychologically unfit to cope. Each story moves me as I struggle to understand the problems of my own world and my responsibility and capacity to address them. Those of you who actually know something about 18th century theater or Native American narrative will have perceived quite early on that I am not an expert in either of these things. Furthermore, there's a whole lot of mediation here, turning an old musical score into a modern production, and then I'm reducing it to the language of a lecture. There's even more mediation when we turn an oral narrative into a transcription, then a translation, then a retranslation and retranscription 100 years later, all through the vehicle of intellectually and morally fallible human beings. And some of the transmitters here committed abuses of power in their own spheres. Still, and this is a point that both Mozart and Charles Culty would endorse, imperfect communication is what communication is. We can correct for the inertias of form and the differences of perspective by staying in contact, by interacting with those others around us. In our world, this is what universities are for. Standing at a slight remove from direct action in the world, the university provides the space of listening and reflection that can keep us from hurtling forward to individual or collective disaster. And education in the liberal arts pulls the voices of the world into a network of encounters at human scale. I am forever grateful to Indiana University for giving this to me. Thank you.